little bit of background about myself, my military background. My name's Tom Smith, Thomas P. Smith. I am an Army veteran. I served 23 years in the military. I was a finance officer, and I I spent 9 years on active duty and 14 years in the reserves. Um, I, my first duty assignment was Korea. I wound up in Germany. From Germany, wound up in Desert Storm for a little while. Came back to Germany, wound up at Fort Irwin, California, which is the National Training Center, where they sent all of the Desert Storm veterans after that point in time, and spent a couple years there and decided to go into banking, but I stuck it out with the military. I wound up with the 85th Division in Chicago area, became a two-star general's aide, and then wound up moving on to San Francisco, where I was part of the 91st Division and sort of finished my time there in the G8 or the finance area, sort of responsible for all the budgets for the military. Um, Had a great 23 years, enjoyed the heck out of it. Would do it again. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about your experience in boot camp.
So as an officer, I went through ROTC, and the second year for us officers was to go back and compete for a scholarship for 6 weeks, and they called that basic training. It was at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and I was working at a grocery store, working night crew, and kind of miserable because I had this idea that I could work nights and then surf in the morning and then sleep in the afternoon. The problem is I never slept. So when the university that I was going to go to offered to go back and compete for a scholarship, I took it and wound up at Fort Knox, Kentucky. 6 weeks of what started out to be hell, like any basic training, getting yelled at coming off the bus. Turned out for me to be a great time. Everything worked out really well, and I walked away from that 6 week experience with a scholarship at Cal Poly for the remaining of my 3 years there, and it's probably one of the best decisions I made. Yeah. So.
After your basic training, walk me through sort of where you were stationed next and what happened after that.
Well, so after basic training, for officers, that the very next year we go to Fort Lewis, Kentucky, and we compete technically for our branch. So, in other words, you go and you compete another 6 weeks against officers across the country. In this case, it was the Western region, and you score a certain point, and then you apply for your branch. I was accepted as a finance officer, which is the most, for the Army, the toughest branch to get. And the reason why it's the toughest branch is that you have to be a business major. The guys at the academy can't do it because there's no business majors at the academy. So they wind up in combat arms of some sort. And OCS typically doesn't go into that. So it's really ROTC that fills that void. And when it came in, I remember getting assigned as a finance officer, and it was just an amazing experience because my MS4 advisor at the time wanted to be a finance officer, and he didn't get it. So it was a big win for me. And when I graduated, my first duty assignment came back is Korea, Seoul, Korea, which was super cool because in 1988, when I went in the military, I wound up it was during the Olympics. So being stationed in Korea in 1988 in Seoul, we would be working in the finance office, making sure all the soldiers were getting paid right. Um, People would walk in with gold medal round tickets and drop them on the table and say, anybody want to go? Because it just wasn't a lot of people didn't show up for it, thinking that there was going to be some sort of terrorist start things. And we wound up it was an amazing experience. Me and another lieutenant, my roommate, we wound up at every event, gold medal, it's pretty cool.
Where did you go after Korea?
So after Korea, the Army wanted to send me to Washington, D.C. They called it MDW, the Military District of Washington. I was going to be the finance guy there. And I asked my colonel in Korea, I said, I joined the military to travel, and I would love to go to Germany. It was actually a girl in Germany that I wanted to pursue too, sort of came with it. And he called DA and Department of the Army, and boom. Next thing I know, I wound up in Bremerhaven, Germany, which is the north part. It's in the English sector of Germany. So Germany was Western Germany was carved up in sectors. So the north part was England, the sort of central south part was the U.S. It was, I went kicking and screaming, thinking I was going to be wearing a field jacket in July up on the North Sea. Turned out to be the best gift that ever happened. There weren't a lot of Americans. Not that I hate Americans, but it was great to get away, and the food. I mean, nowhere in Germany could you get fish goulash as if you're sitting on the North Sea. I mean, it was just incredible. What a great experience. But
Where were you stationed after Germany?
so 3 years in Germany. At about the second year, um, I was with the Second Armored Division Forward in Garlstadt, Germany, which is just a little south of Bremerhaven. And I'm coming home from work because I provided the finance support to that brigade forward. And I get home and I walk in the front door, and my wife's crying. And she said, the major called and wants you back at the unit, which was in Bremerhaven. That was sort of our main unit. So it's 7 o'clock at night. I drove back in, and the training room is full of all the soldiers from our unit. And the major said, Captain Smith, or actually it was First Lieutenant at the time, First Lieutenant Smith, you are going to be the company commander going with the Second Armored Division to Iraq. And so that was my departure from Germany. The idea with Department of the Army is they were sending a lot of units from Germany because they were going to draw down in Germany because the threat wasn't quite there as it was before. And we were sending all of us to Iraq to fight in the Desert Storm. And as much as I hated that, to have to go, I got my company command in as a first lieutenant, which any officer knows that usually doesn't come to you in an 03 or you're a captain. And the second thing is that I'm so proud of the fact that I got to serve in a war like that with the 1st Infantry Division. And every Army guy knows that you get to put that on your right shoulder. And I've been super proud of that. Came back to Germany to pack my bags, and I was off to the advanced course after that. So that was sort of my departure from that at that point. Yeah.
What was it like initially arriving to Iraq?
That's a really good question. So arriving in Iraq, I had this preconceived notion. So we get on a C-141, and I've got my company there that I'm going to be commanding in Iraq. We're in jump seats, right? They're just nylon straps, and they're handing us, Wonder Bread sandwiches, which was pretty cool. But at the same time, you're eating Wonder Bread sandwiches, with not a lot of anything on it. But there wasn't a lot of sleep, so you get really incredibly tired. But you're going into a war zone, which in itself is kind of scary. Are we going to walk off the aircraft and people are going to be shooting at us? It turns out it was nothing like that. It was hot as Hades, or as hot as Arizona, maybe. But it was all about hustling and trying to figure out when our equipment was going to be delivered in country. So we wound up in this site with the Second Armored Division Forward. They gave us our own GP medium. We tried to crush everybody in that, and we just waited. We waited for our equipment to arrive, which is a finance unit. You're pretty low on sort of the priority list versus the tanks and everything else that come across. But I tell you what, they took care of us. And we got our stuff together, and then it was ready to move out. And then we waited for our bigger unit to sort of link up with us. A lot of nerves. And during that period of time, Saddam Hussein shot the Scuds at us, and we're sitting there in Jabal, and we're getting word over the phone that the Scuds are flying, right? And you didn't know what to do because you're in a GP medium. It's not a lot of sort of protection from that kind of stuff. I've got guys sitting on my equipment, making sure nobody's stealing it. And I'm worried about those guys. You're worried about everybody. And it was just a really stressful period of time, And but thank God it all worked out.
What were some of your duties while you're out there in Desert Storm?
So, yeah, really good question. Not a lot of people know what finance guys do, but we are a big part of the battlefield. And I know it sounds kind of ridiculous, but I always tell people that soldiers don't fight very well when their families back in Germany or the US aren't getting paid, right? And a family can't walk into a finance office and fix pay. It has to be the soldier in, to say that, yes, I should be getting BAQ or I should be getting some sort of other pay. So that's why we're there. We're there to engage with the soldier to make sure their pay is correct. One. All right. Number two is we're there to get them because, everybody wants cash, even in a battlefield sort of environment. So we give them a little bit of money. We call those, combat pay. We'll give them $50. Maybe they want to gamble in the tent. Maybe they want to go out and buy some food from the local economy. But the bigger thing is number three is I provide money to officers from that unit that they can go out and take care of. Sometimes the U.S. Army runs over somebody's house, or we take wood to build overhead cover, or we need sandbags that we just forgot to bring. The finance person funds what we call Class A agents to go out there and make sure we reconcile with those the civilian population, because the last thing you want them to do is hate us because we're stealing stuff or we're not, we killed somebody and we're not taking care of the family. And that's what my role is to make sure that we're sort of cleaning up after ourselves from a financial standpoint.
How long did you spend in Iraq?
I spent just about 6 months, maybe a little bit more, but I got in there early part of January, left in the latter part of sort of early June. Actually, maybe we got there in December. Left right after Christmas, and so we went from probably in the early part of winter. It was cold as I've never been so cold in my life in March in Saudi Arabia. I don't I think everybody thinks it's gonna be hot, but by the time we left in May, I'd never been so well, until I moved to Arizona, I've never been so warm. And it was an incredible experience, right? So after all the rains in March, all of a sudden the whole desert turned green just for a short period of time, and all the camels would come walking and grazing on all of these weeds that were just growing out of the Sahara Desert. And then it dried up and got hot as hell, and sometimes we get these hoodoos that would just knock down our tents. It was a crazy experience, but it was something to experience, right? So
What's your favorite memory looking back on your entire time in the Middle East?
my favorite memory in terms of the Middle East is I used to, because I was the pay officer, I would have to go back to Riyadh so we were sitting up on the oil fires in Iraq after we were at the 1st Infantry Division, 1st Unit into Iraq. We get up on the oil fires, we set up and we watch them burn. But at the same time, now suddenly we go into a peace mode, or at least, it's still wartime, but everything gets calm and suddenly everybody worries about their pay. So we get really busy. My job is to go back to Riyadh where we had central funding and pick up money and bring it back to the front lines. And that was a great sort of mission. We go back to Riyadh and it would be an Air Force base, and suddenly you're exposed to the PX and all these great things. And we were exposed to these Saudi American bankers. We were Saudi guys, and they would throw a banquet for us as the bankers. They would shut these big doors and everything. It was just a lot of fun, and I got to experience that towards the end of my 6 months. You just can't explain to somebody how fun that was. How the Saudis just love to celebrate. That they got rid of Saddam and everything turned out all right. Right.
Were you ever scared during your time in the Middle East? Did you ever encounter anything that made you stress?
Yeah. So the finance group sits at Division Main. They call it D Main. And so there were some scary times. We would get calls in the middle of the night. Division Main headquarters would say, "It's a stand to. I want every soldier at the berm." We didn't know what the motivation of that was, but we'd have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. Not that I don't get up early anyway, but I'd have to make sure all my soldiers were standing in their positions because there was probably a threat coming. And you never knew to what degree that threat was. We had this idea that there were going to be Republican guards coming. You know, the front lines are moving out fast and there's not a lot of integrity. So it sort of exposes some of the rear support groups to provide their own security. And we had to do that. And we're a bunch of finance guys out there sort of providing that security. And you always kind of wonder how good we might be at doing that. Yeah.
And what was it like when you finally left the Middle East?
So yeah, great question. So brings back these memories. So leaving the Middle East, it took forever. You know, the war sort of ended in February, March. We didn't go home until the end of May, and it was getting warmer by the day. But when they did put us in, lined us up to get on these 747s, or I forget what kind of aircraft they were, but they packed it full of stinky combat arms guys, and, finance guys are part of that. But I tell you what, they treated us like kings on that flight. And Lee Greenwood would be on the screen, and whatever movie you wanted to watch, it really took care of us. But it became this huge American celebration of what we had achieved. And you felt kind of guilty because you didn't really felt like you were that kind of contributor. But the guy brought tears to the eyes, how appreciative America was. And I assume it's what the Vietnam veterans never got to experience. And then once we got back to Germany, it was one parade after another to celebrate our success. And that kind of got old. But the first few were great, but everybody wanted a parade. The Germans wanted a parade, the Americans wanted a parade, and we were marching like crazy. Enough, right? You just want to be with your family. So, but that flight back was tears to your eyes. It was incredible.
And then you mentioned that towards the end of your career, you went to San Francisco and finished out there.
Yeah, so I went back to, came back to Germany, and then the Army sent me to the advanced course, which was in Indianapolis. I graduated from the advanced course, did fairly well, and then I asked to go back to California. And they sent me to the National Training Center. And if anybody's ever been to that place, it's like being back in Saudi Arabia or being on the moon. And I spent 3 years there. Turned out to be great duty, but my wife cried as we were driving into that duty spot. But it worked out really well because she wound up, getting a job, and that turned into some opportunity. And that's when I decided to leave the military. And we wound up in Chicago. I joined the 85th Division. I became a general's aide. After 2 years there, my wife got transferred back to California, and that's when I wound up in San Francisco, part of the 91st Division. 91st Division has an amazing history. A lot of people don't know about it, but they fought up the boot of Italy during World War II. And I was at the division headquarters, close to the two-star general. Great experience, except it sits right underneath the Golden Gate Bridge. Getting to work every day was hell. Yeah, but it was beautiful. Yeah.
Do you regret your time in the service at all?
No regrets. Probably, other than marrying my wife, it was probably the number one decision I ever made. Because, as a guy who went to the college, right? I didn't know what I was going to do next. I know I wanted to be a finance major, but I had no idea where I was going to wind up. And the great thing about joining the military, it helped to get a scholarship when I competed for it, but is that all your buddies in college are interviewing, and they're stressed, right? Like, I don't want to go back to mom and dad's house. So they're stressed, they're interviewing, and you have a job. You're going to a basic course in Indianapolis to start that finance job. It was just you just got to skate through all that stress that everybody else had to go through. So
After being in the Middle East and now your entire career serving, what is sort of your thoughts on war and the military in general?
oh man, it's a big question. So my thoughts on it's so perfect right now with the whole Iranian thing going on. Sometime I really believe in deterrence. I believe that if we bring a big stick, that it actually eliminates a lot of the, the threat or maybe the casualties or whatever come with that. Clearly, it did that in the Iraqi conflict. It's a shame that we had to go back and finish things off. But I think I sort of believe in what the military represents. I hate to send soldiers into war, but I remember some of the news coverage at the time that these people signed up for degrees or scholarships, and it's a shame that they have to go fight. Well, we make those decisions in life, and you have to understand the repercussions of that. Sometimes you have to go to war, and hopefully it's for the right reason. Um, and whoever's making those decisions, and does their due diligence and make sure that again, it's there's a clear objective